once you start to realize what it is, you kind of FOMO into it because you just don't want to miss it. I mean, I remember listening to Saylor talking about how when he first found it, he was like, oh my God, I got to buy as much of this thing as I can before it gets away from me. And of course, he still keeps buying it, even though it's higher. And I think, when people have that quote unquote aha moment, and more of them have it, Samson's not wrong. I mean, we will be at $1 million a coin. It's and that's why, that's why I'm not going to sell any, and that's why, don't cap your upside. You just don't know what's going to happen, So but you've got to always be mentally prepared for the drawdown. We could be at 200 in a year, which seems very likely to me. At the end of this year, we'd be at 200. And we could all be feeling great and think we're geniuses and, look at the numbers and say, gosh, I'm a lot richer than I used to be.
Lawrence Lepard explores the mechanisms of Bitcoin's price fluctuations and identifies a recurring trend of steep price surges mixed with consolidation periods. He points out that Bitcoin rose from $58,000 to $70,000 and then to $100,000, and he predicts that the next big increase could cause it to reach $130,000 or higher. Using past cycles as a guide, Lepard forecasts that $200,000 per Bitcoin is a reasonable goal, while changes in monetary policy and geopolitical events may push it even higher. He continues to have faith in Bitcoin's long-term potential as a store of value in spite of market turbulence. Please remember to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and enable post notifications if you have a strong interest in learning about the future of finance and the function of digital assets like Bitcoin. This will ensure that you never miss anything. Thank you and enjoy the video.
So I'll start it off the bat. Last time we talked, we weren't quite over this 100K mark. So how high do you think we're going here, Larry? Do you think this is the suddenly time?
I wish I knew, and I hope Samson's right. But if, I think you can very conservatively, I mean, I was calling for 100. You could see, I like the way it's progressing. It kind of moves up and then it builds a nice big base and flag, and then it moves up again and builds, so we're at 58, and then we went to 70, and then we went to 100. And I think the next move is going to take us to 130 or something. And where's the top on the cycle? I don't know. Looking at last cycles, I mean, I would guess, I think 200 is just kind of easy. It feels to me like we will get there, no question. Does it go a lot beyond that? It could. I mean, how many standard deviations above, the 200-day moving average can it go, right? I mean, and obviously at any point in time, different political events could shove it much higher. I mean, I think if the big print comes along, which is, we'll talk about that later, but if the government has to capitulate and start printing money again, it'll go a lot higher than 200 on this cycle. And that's a possibility, but there are never any certainties in this world. But I feel very good, buying it right here. I think it will be higher. I also think that when we get to the next peak, there'll probably be a correction. I don't think we're going to see any more of the 80 or 90% corrections, but a 30, 40, 50% correction would certainly be, something I could see. So, I mean, my model is maybe it goes to 250 and then corrects back to 150 or something. I think we're kind of already in it, and actually lower rates would somewhat help. I mean, the lower rates, the greater problem there is that it will reignite inflation. I mean, I don't think they really have inflation tamed. My most recent quarterly letter just out talks about that. There's a lot of evidence they don't. Labor is getting more than 2% a year. The longshoremen just got 10% for a year for 6 years. Agriculture commodities last year as a basket were up 20 some odd %, which is why, your food bills are higher. And to me, it's coming, but I don't know when. And that is the hard part. But for those of us who are in Bitcoin and who have kind of a hodl philosophy and have had it for years and years, it doesn't really matter, right? I mean, if we, I'm quite convinced these coins are going to $1 million and then someday $10 million, very much like Saylor says. And, whether it happens in 3 years or 6 years, it's the same place. And we have long time preference. We can wait. So, 2 trillion on 900, that means 0.2% of the world's assets are in Bitcoin right now. 0.2%. Okay. So Bitcoin could go up 10x. Bitcoin could go from 0.2% to 2% of the world's assets. And it would still, represent a small fraction. I mean, the amount of gold in the world, there's $18 trillion worth of gold in the world. So Bitcoin's got to go up 9x to beat gold. And, to me, it's just obvious that it's going to happen unless something in the trends that I'm looking at changes. And that's always possible. I mean, you never say never in the investment business because, you can believe something and be totally wrong. But, it doesn't, I mean, I don't see anything to indicate that that's likely to happen. So, and I think 2% is just a starting point. I mean, if this really is a sounder form of money than anything else out there, it will become, the go-to long-term saving asset that just kind of compounds over time. And, oh, it's 100,000, I've missed it. I know you bought it a lot cheaper. Gosh, good for you, but that's not so good for me. And I'm kind of like, well, if I told you, I had a story about this in the book. In Microsoft, I bought it. It went up 3 or 4x, and I needed some money, so I sold it. But it continued to go up another 1,000x. Do you know what I mean? And so, if in 5 years Bitcoin's $1 million, I think that's very doable. And in 15 years, Bitcoin's $10 million. I think that's very doable. Are you going to care that you paid 90 or 110 for it? I mean, I don't think so. And that's the way you got to look at it. I mean, I get a kick out of, talk to Max Kaiser, and he says, yeah, I felt like I was overpaying because Trace was getting it 25 cents and I had to pay $1. Do you know what I mean? I mean, everybody feels like they're overpaying, and that's just the nature. You got to understand what it is. There's a fixed supply of it, so it's always going to feel expensive, because as he says, it's going up forever, Laura. And so you just buy it and sit back. And I mean, the toughest part, and I talk about this in the book too, is, to people who don't really fundamentally understand what it is. And I had some people I put into it, kind of at the tops before the SBF episode at 50 or 60, and they were buying it. And it went down to 15 because of SBF and, rate hikes and all the other stuff. And they said, oh shit, I made a mistake. And they blew it out, right? They sold it. And that's the toughest part. I think it's incumbent upon all of us Bitcoiners to help the people that we're bringing along with us to understand that you've got to view this as if it goes down 50%, I don't care. Because I have a 5, 10, 15, 20-year window here. And I know, everyone who's held it for 4 years is in the black. And I think that pattern will continue.
According to Lawrence Lepard, Bitcoin is similar to early investment prospects such as Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, when a large number of investors lost out on enormous profits due to early sales. He warns against restricting one's potential upside and stresses the value of patience. Lepard claims that owning Bitcoin for 10 years or longer could result in wealth that changes people's lives. Additionally, he thinks that simply possessing a single Bitcoin might revolutionize the way that future generations live. He uses the example of a truck driver who thanked him for his Bitcoin insights to show how even a modest investment had made a big difference in his financial circumstances. Please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and enable post notifications for future Bitcoin, macroeconomic, and digital asset content before we go any further. Now, let's get into his powerful predictions.
And so, as we get more and more people using Bitcoin or using any network, the networks gets bigger and more powerful in a geometric kind of fashion. So that's why, when we sit here and we look at, and you hear Saylor say $13 million Bitcoin, or I'm saying $10 million Bitcoin, and people just look at me like I'm nuts, like you're out of your mind. That's never going to happen. And I'm absolutely sure it's going to happen. I'm completely convinced of it, but people think I'm crazy, and it's just because of the model that I'm using, and I'm comparing it to these other network businesses and what they did in terms of value growth, right? And so there's this chapter in this book that compares Bitcoin to all the other. I mean, Bitcoin is just crushing every other alternative investment. So if you're in the investment management business and you're not aware of Bitcoin, considering Bitcoin, saying, hey, maybe you should have a little allocation to it. I mean, look, I understand why people are concerned and afraid about it. In fact, there's a chapter in the book called Skepticism that talks about all the FUD that people have thrown up, and I've tried to swat those things away. Yeah, TradFi, I think, it's, they're going to be forced. I mean, when you were performing so much better just by having a little bit of Bitcoin in your portfolio than the person who just owns the S&P and doesn't have the Bitcoin, that's their job. Their job is to get good performance for their clients. And so, at some point they're going to slowly but surely all be forced to wake up and recognize that they're not doing their job if they don't allocate something into this asset. Again, the book is trying to push that, that narrative and help them to understand it. And I try and do it, in a reasonably kind way. The only part of the book that's kind of unkind is I'm pretty harsh on the central bankers, because they've, in my view, they really are they're at the scene of the crime, and they're the arrogance of the central bankers is part of how we got into this mess. But I think, what will probably happen is, some more nation states will announce that they're stacking it. The U.S. just, as you saw, Trump just signed an executive order talking about creating a digital reserve. I wish he'd called it a Bitcoin reserve, but he had to give a nod to all the other coins that have supported him in his election. I think, it will get onto bank balance sheets. I mean, it's just, I think once you start to realize what it is, you kind of FOMO into it because you just don't want to miss it. I mean, I remember listening to Saylor talking about how when he first found it, he was like, oh my God, I got to buy as much of this thing as I can before it gets away from me. And of course, he still keeps buying it, even though it's higher. And I think, when people have that quote unquote aha moment, and more of them have it, Samson's not wrong. I mean, we will be $1 million a coin. It's and that's why, that's why I'm not going to sell any, and that's why don't cap your upside. You just don't know what's going to happen. So but you've got to always be mentally prepared for the drawdown. We could be at 200 in a year, which seems very likely to me. At the end of this year, we'd be at 200. And we could all be feeling great, think we're geniuses, and look at the numbers and say, gosh, I'm a lot richer than I used to be. And something could happen and we could have a 50% drawdown easily. And, that would be a great buying opportunity in my view.
Lawrence Lepard is certain that Bitcoin will hit historic highs, with estimates of between $1 million and $10 million per coin. Although many people reject these figures as irrational, Lepard contends that the growth of Bitcoin is comparable to that of significant network companies such as Amazon and Google. According to him, institutional money managers that overlook Bitcoin are failing their clients because it is surpassing all other investment possibilities. Professional investors will eventually be compelled to allocate to Bitcoin, he says, as its better returns become unavoidable. In addition, he criticizes central bankers and holds them accountable for economic instability through their actions. Lepard highlights that Bitcoin will continue to gain traction as governments struggle with debt and inflation, and it may even make an appearance on bank balance sheets and national reserves. He cites Michael Saylor's moment when he realized the worth of Bitcoin and contends that FOMO will encourage additional adoption once investors see its potential. He cautions that there will be volatility along the way for Bitcoin, reminding investors that large declines of up to 50% are common and should be viewed as opportunities for purchases rather than as causes for panic. Lepard believes that in his more than 40 years of investing, Bitcoin is the most asymmetric investment opportunity he has ever come across. A truck driver thanked him for introducing him to Bitcoin and explained how it had significantly improved his financial situation, among other personal stories of people whose lives have been changed by even little Bitcoin purchases. In the upcoming decades, he believes that simply possessing one Bitcoin might have a profound impact on one's life. And as always, happy investing.